This episode is brought to us by Oris Watches. You know, a piece of equipment on any adventure that I'm honestly surprised by how much I use is my watch. And I'm wearing a watch right now. I always have a watch on. And I believe that you should check out Oris Watches. Oris is a 119-year-old family-owned independent watch brand based out of Holstein, Switzerland. The brand has been certified climate and carbon neutral since 2021 and every year releases a sustainability report. Oris only makes mechanical watches like the new Pro Pilot X Caliber 400 and the new Pro Pilot Altimeter featuring a 3D printed carbon case. If you're a fan of mechanical watches like I am, there's nothing in the game that's better than Oris, and you can discover the full Oris collection at a retailer near you or at oris.ch. So if you want that one piece of equipment in your life to be functional, to be useful, to be beautiful, artistic, check out Oris Watches. Oris, go your own way. As y'all have heard me say before, the most important part of planning any adventure are the snacks. And if you're looking for a delicious and nutritious snack that packs a real protein punch, crack into a good source of protein with tasty, healthy, wonderful pistachios. Each 1 ounce serving of wonderful pistachios contains 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value in that one serving. It's one of the highest protein nuts out there. And that's not all. Pistachios are also known for the fiber and better for you unsaturated fats, which may help keep you feeling fuller longer. Best part, wonderful pistachios come in a variety of flavors and sizes. Perfect for enjoying with your family and friends or taking them with you on your summer adventures for those snacks we're talking about. So whether you're dropping off the kiddos or running between meetings or about to climb a mountain, fuel up with a healthy and tasty snack. Wonderful Pistachios will be your new go-to. You can check them out at wonderfulpistachios.com and learn more about how these little green wonders can power up your day. Hey folks, if you remember last week, we talked to Lonnie Bedwell about climbing Mount Everest, and he mentioned his team. Well, we were able to sit down and talk with one of his guides, Neal, not long after we interviewed him, just to hear the experience. Michael and Bryan Hill, who helped to get Lonnie to the summit of Everest, had their own adventure before climbing Everest, which was biking, trying to set a world record for the fastest known time from sea level to the top of Mount Everest. And they started in the Indian Ocean and did almost 800 miles of riding from sea level to high alpine mountain town before trekking up to Everest Base Camp and continuing to the summit of Everest. So this is part of that story from Michael's perspective. It was just sounds awesome, sounds so unique. Especially for an Everest attempt and an Everest climb. And this is the second time Michael's climbed Everest. So pretty special story, really cool interview, kind of a classic adventure sports podcast story, but it's connected to last week. So if you haven't already, listen to Lonnie's story. It is amazing. He's the first blind U.S. veteran to climb Everest, so that's what makes that so special. So give that a listen. You're going to be inspired, and Michael was incredibly inspired to be a part of it, and he's got tons and tons of stories in his own right, does so many cool adventures, so it was a pleasure to hear from him. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Michael, Neal, welcome to Adventure Sports Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, this is awesome. So, you know, you've got a lot we could talk about. We're going to focus on one of your adventures. But before we do, as tradition of the show, where are you coming from today? And is that home?
I live in Oregon. I live on a lake near Bend, Oregon, called Lake Billy Chinook.
Are you from there? Have you been there a while, if you're not from there?
We raised our children in Portland, about 3-hour drive from here, but we're empty nesters now, so we're we spend most of our time here. We still own our home in Portland, but we spend most of our time here.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So, the adventure, you're obviously in an adventurous place. We've had a lot of guests over the years from the Bend area or just out of Oregon. There's obviously a lot of cool stuff to do. What was your journey getting into adventure sports? Did you grow up in a family that kind of did this kind of stuff, or did you have to come across it on your own terms?
Yeah, I definitely did not grow up in a family that did this kind of stuff. I didn't do this kind of stuff. I got a little lucky with some business projects that I was working on. Retired in my early 40s, and I'm not asking for sympathy or won't get it anyways. But one of the challenges you have when you retire young is keeping your days full of something that's meaningful and exciting and fun. So for me, that was it. Started out with working my brain. I went to law school. I feel like I didn't do a good job educating my children about the value of education. I dropped out of college as a kid, so as a young person. So went back, finished my undergraduate degree. Then I went to law school and became a lawyer. And then after that, I kind of shifted over to athletics, hiking. I started rock climbing. Rock climbing, I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of people. It is such a fun sport. It is just a hoot to be out rock climbing. And how I rock climb over time has changed, especially as I've aged. But you start looking at bigger and taller things, and I got into mountaineering and some long distance cycling and some other stuff. So,
Yeah, man, you've got an interesting phenomenon there, retiring in your early 40s and trying to fill your days. How challenging is that? Because I feel like what's soft and similar is like professional athletes. A lot of athletes, especially like superstars, they make a lot of money and whatnot early on in life, and then and they're celebrated by like 100,000 people every week. That they're cheering their name or they're at games, and it's just this. It seems like just an unbelievable experience for a lot of them, and then. But careers are, 5 years on average, or 10 years in the NBA, maybe a little shorter. And then like, what do you do from that point of on? How challenging for you was that?
yeah, I'm certainly not in the situation that you just described as professional athletes as my career. I just owned a couple of businesses and they happened to sell at the right time. And I actually didn't intend to graduate or retire. I intended to spend my kids, I have 4 children. I intended to spend their high school years with them, being an involved dad, kind of involved. And that was 14 years ago. So it just kind of stuck. And, but it is hard. I mean, again, I'm not asking for sympathy. Nobody will give it to me anyways if I ask, but finding something meaningful to do with your day in a way that you can influence your children. And now my grandchildren, I have 4 grand boys and a 5th one on the way. And it's just making a difference to them and showing them that we can do hard things. That's why I do this. It's fun for me to do all these fun things for myself, but it's also hopefully I'm able to pass on to the next generation that this isn't a dress rehearsal. This life is real and we can do awesome things with it and get to see an amazing planet that we've been gifted. And so for me, it's about enjoying my time, but also hopefully instructing my grandchildren.
During that time of either rediscovery or self-discovery, who did you look at for inspiration? Was there anybody that followed the same path? Who were you kind of looking at as an example, if anyone?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not really anyone. I just found stuff that I liked. And it's a very, if you go to a park, like a city park, and you see a bunch of 3 and 4-year-old, almost every time they're climbing little rocks and getting to the top of them and puffing out their chest. They're like, hey, look, mom, I did this thing. It's climbing rocks and mountains. It's kind of it's a return to your infancy. It's a very juvenile, thing to want to do. And I just found it to be fun. And for me anyway, the more I did hard things, the harder, I got stronger. And then I wanted to do the next hard and maybe even harder thing. And it became just kind of a process of self-improvement and self-development.
Something I want to talk about today is this Sea to Summit bicycle tour you did on your way to climb Everest twice, or for the second time. But what were some of those major milestones leading up to that? And maybe as a follow-up question, what was like a really impactful adventure for you? Because sometimes what people are known for is not always what's the most, what was the biggest impact on them personally, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let me first talk about the Sightless Summit. So, I got connected with Lonnie Bedwell. He's a blind U.S. Navy veteran several years ago. He's an amazing person. You got to interview him the other day. He's a tremendous person to be involved with. I met him on a mountain in Argentina, and I heard a rumor that that there were two blind guys on the mountain, and frankly couldn't believe it. The path that goes up Aconcagua is not an easy path for a sighted person. A lot of rolling rocks. I call them ankle breakers. I thought there's no way that a non-sighted person could do that. But we became friends. I met him. We became friends, and we spent a fair amount of time over the next week and a half in his tent chatting. And in a platonic way, I fell in love with him, and I fell in love with what he was doing. And he became kind of an inspiration to me. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about him and his kind of journey and my small role that I played in that. But that was kind of the start of doing fun things with Lonnie. The bicycle ride, when we created this group, Sightless Summits, and we decided to get him to the top of Everest, our original goal was to do Everest and Lhotse together, and he would set a world record for being the first blind person to do that. He is the first blind veteran to summit Everest, but he's not the first blind person to climb Everest. And so we had hoped that the Lhotse add-on would be a really cool experience. But it felt so. Me and a buddy are kind of the sighted side of Sightless Summits, the two people who can see. And we decided that we felt a little bit left out by not setting world records. Lonnie got to set a world record. Why can't we do something fun? And so,
why does the blind guy get to have all the fun?
Yeah, right. So we decided that we would fly with our bicycles to the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean, and ride from there across India, the northern part of India, into Nepal, and then meet Lonnie up at the high altitude village called Lukla, and from there trek to the summit. So I have been bicycle touring for a while. I'm doing the Americas in segments. I do bicycle riding, touring, maybe 1,500 miles at a time. So I just finished Panama. A couple months, I'll head down to Colombia and continue down South Argentina.
And where did that start? Where did that journey, that segmented bicycle of the Americas start?
In Bend, here in Oregon.
Right there at home. And your goal is to make it where?
Down to southern Argentina, Ushuaia, just the town down there. And
do you think you'll eventually take it from Bend up to a Whitehorse, or not Whitehorse, but Prudhoe Bay up in Alaska?
I will. Eventually, I'll connect it up to Prudhoe Bay so I can just say I've done the entire Americas. And as a part of it, I'm climbing the tallest mountain in every country that I ride my bicycle through, which kind of connects my mountaineering passion with my bicycling passion. And I've been doing that for a little while. So for me, it's a fun, exercise to go do that stuff. So anyways, I'll head down to Colombia in a little bit and continue my ride south. But so Bryan and I Bryan is my partner in the Sightless Summits project. We came up with this idea of riding from sea level to the high altitude village of Lukla, where we would meet Lonnie. And then from there, we would trek up to Everest.
Wow.
It had been done before a couple of decades ago. And we just wanted to see if we could do it. So if I remember right, it was about 900 miles, something like that. About 30,000 feet of vertical elevation on the bicycle, and then hiking the rest of the way with Lonnie. We did, do it faster than it's ever been done before, but I wouldn't say I'm proud of the speed. Anybody wants to beat it if they bother, they'll be able to beat it. First of all, they're not going through, they won't be, escorting a blind guide at the summit. But second of all, I think if they're pre-acclimatized and that kind of stuff, they could probably shave a couple of weeks off of the whole trip. So.
Wow. Well, this is such a fascinating idea because it's such a unique twist on, the story we've heard a lot of, which is doing Everest. And, truly, people often say it's like what I did was like climbing Everest 5 times, or, you know what I mean? Yeah. You hear that referenced a lot. Yeah. But I'm like, no, when you climb Everest, you're not starting at sea level. Well, you did.
Right.
You and your friend did. I mean, you're doing every inch of elevation of Everest starting at sea level, which is so crazy. What does it look like where you are at sea level, where you started in India? What's the setting? What would you describe, and how familiar were you with that kind of bike touring in India? Was it your first time biking through there?
It was, yeah. So everywhere I bicycled, I've been able to speak the language. So I'm a fluent Spanish speaker. I learned it as a kid. So going through Mexico and Central America and South America isn't that challenging. It's challenging, but not from a language
From a
standpoint.
language point of view. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes
So
sense.
India, I would say India is vastly different from almost anything I've done. It is a culture I didn't quite expect the culture to be as the people are different. The language is, of course, completely different. We could wave, our hands a little bit and communicate, but a couple of things we notice about India is there are a lot of people there. And by a lot, I mean a lot. So you're never outside of, you might go, an hour in between villages, towns, but you're never not without, outside of seeing people.
That's interesting. I mean, I've heard other people talk about that as biking through parts of China. Like, you think you're alone.
No.
There's people around. What did that feel like? Was that tough to get used to? Because you live in a place where you can at least get away if you want to.
Yeah, I live very remotely, but the thing about India is that they have a culture of density. So they have a different sense of body distance, a personal space. So if we stopped this is one of the fun things it was interesting for us when we would stop our bicycles to get a drink or to check on something or buy something, we would be swarmed by people. And within 30 or 40 seconds, it'd be 8 or 10 people. But if we stayed in the same place for more than 3 minutes, we'd have 30 or 40 people all piled around us. And they would just get really close right up next to you and stare. And they would try to communicate, but we can't, we could wave our arms a little bit in our hands, but the personal space issue is different from them. So they have no problem wrapping their arm around you and pulling you away from your bicycle so that they could get their selfies. They're obsessed with taking pictures, and they wanted to constantly get pictures of me and my buddy. And, at first, when you're being removed from your bicycle, that's a concern because you're like, yeah, somebody's going to steal my bicycle.
Most of the time, it's a bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was not the case here. We quickly learned that these people are kind and gracious, and they just want their selfies. We had people, cars on the highway work together. One would get in front of us, and one would get to the side of us, and they would force us off the highway, like forcing us to stop in the shoulder.
It's like, and box of course, you in.
Yeah, wow. That happens here in the United States or elsewhere in the world. You're going to get chopped up into little pieces. These people, all they wanted was their selfie. So they would pull us over, and then they'd come over and swarm us in the middle of the highway with their cameras and ask questions. One of the questions they asked, we're going, Everest. We could communicate there. And then one of the questions they wanted to know is, how much is our bike? How much? Dollar,
Yeah.
And we started by telling them $1,000 the bike, and that sent them over the moon. So we thought, well, let's not say that anymore. Let's cut it in half. Let's say $500.
And it was, in all honesty, it's probably more.
Oh yeah, it's way more than both of those numbers. But we started at $500, or we went to $500, and that still blew their minds. So after a while, and this is the same question we got every single time we got pulled over. We would just stop responding. Go, oh no, it's very cheap, very inexpensive bike. That's all we would say about it. But
super interesting, man, and such an element that not a lot of people climbing Everest have, of course. What did people think of when you did? Because I get this a lot when people, when I tell people when you're bike touring, especially and you're going through towns, you are the anomaly to people's day. They're having a regular day and they see a dude or a lady on a bike. What are you doing? And that's what they're talking about to their family at dinner. You won't believe who I met today. So you are an anomaly. So people want to ask you questions. And I get it a lot. I'll tell people my whole route, and it just, they don't register it. It's like, oh, I'm going cross country. People that I speak the language with, they're like, oh, yeah. What were people's reactions when you said I'm going to Mount Everest?
Shock, obviously. These people don't get beyond 20 miles out of their town. Many of them don't travel. They don't have...
Because you're going through pretty rural areas.
Yeah, it basically started near Calcutta, down in the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal there, and went across northern India. And very poor communities, and they don't get an opportunity. So in some ways, to your point, they do live a little bit vicariously through the experience we're having. For them, it was a big deal to be able to meet us and to, I feel like, and I think my partner Bryan feels the same way, that we're a little bit ambassadors to not only the Western world but to the United States, and our job is to smile and be kind and to show gratitude and be graceful to these people, because they really are really, really kind, nice people. We never once felt a risk or danger or anything like that. It's just the personal space issue that was challenging for us.
What were some of the, of course, saying I'm going to Everest, it's nearly 1,000 miles away, or 700. And that probably felt that way with just how far away you felt. You're starting out in these like coastal areas with, rivers and just a flat area setting that isn't anything like where you're going. It just sounds like, man, you're going uphill for 600-700 miles. Is that what it felt like being on the bike? Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. I love to cook. I am the designated chef of our home. I do most of the cooking. I'd say 90%. But, it's crazy. Sometimes life is nuts. We got 2 little kids. I've got 3 podcasts and full-time job and everything else, and it gets a little hectic. And sometimes I just need an easy and convenient way to make dinner, and that's why I love Green Chef. They offer nutritious, easy to make meals in 30 minutes or less in really good portions, which I'm always worried about. I'm a big guy. I like to eat. And they make it for every lifestyle, very sustainable. They offset 100% of their delivery emissions, and they deliver meal kits right to your door. And everything is in that bag that you need to make a great meal for you and your family, your friends, whoever. I got Green Chef last time we had a baby, and it was awesome because we had a bunch of great meals that were really healthy, really, really delicious, but also very easy to make. We didn't want to eat a ton of fast food or just, frozen dinners for the next few weeks. So if you're interested for Green Chef's best deal of the year, get $250 off with code ASP250 at greenchef.com/ASP250. Again, Green Chef's best deal of the year. Get $250 off with code ASP250 at greenchef.com/ASP250. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well.
The best travel gear isn't born in a factory. It's inspired by journeys taken by real people exploring the world. That's why I love Rourke. Their team pulls designs and inspiration straight from the places they travel and have adventures. And for over 10 years, they've been exploring the globe to seek adventures on the road less traveled. Everything from surfing waves on remote island chains to exploring the streets of Jakarta, the Scottish Highlands, and almost everything in between. Rourke has developed options for you. I'm actually wearing the Rourke Bless Up breathable stretch shirt right now, and I was wearing a Rourke shirt yesterday. I'm traveling right now, and you could probably hear the echo in the room, but I was at this event. This guy was speaking, and he looked down at me and pointed at me right in the middle of his talk and said, "Nice shirt." And I was like, "Thank you very much." It was a Rourke shirt, and I've got my Accomplice Mule 45-liter bag. I love it because it can hold all my podcast gear, take it on the plane, but also holds extra stuff. I can put some clothes in there too, and if I didn't have my podcast gear, it could probably hold everything I needed for this trip. And it's water resistant. I love that. So Rourke offers durable, comfortable styles inspired by the places they've been. And they've got their latest collection, the Hokkaido, featuring Japanese prints and patterns and Japanese manufactured Kaihara premium denim. So if you're traveling, Rourke has the gear options. And for a limited time, if you're a listener of the show, you can get 15% off your first order. Go to Rourke.com. Use the code ASP15 at checkout. That's ROARK.com and use the code ASP15 for 15% off your first order.
Between adventures and crazy trips all around the world and in the swamp or wherever, our guests and podcasts take us, I actually love spending time hanging out on the couch with my family. We just got our first TV, and one of the most crucial pieces of items you need when watching a movie together or hanging out in bed and watching a show as a family is a good blanket. And I have not found anything close to the Barabee hand-knitted weighted blankets. They're so cozy, so comfortable. The kids love them. I fall asleep pretty much every time we turn a movie on with that blanket on because it's just that comfortable. And my family and I have been fully integrated into what Barabee calls the napperhood. So if you're looking for a natural solution to help you sleep better, help you feel calmer, try one of Barabee's hand-knitted weighted blankets. You can find them on Instagram at mybarabee and visit barabee.com. That's BEARABY.com. They offer free shipping and hassle-free returns on all orders within the contiguous U.S. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
So the route was, the first 500 miles was generally flat. We went uphill a little bit, but this part of India is pretty flat. It was right after we crossed into Nepal that it started going uphill. So most of the 29,000 feet that we gained in elevation was in Nepal. It's climbing the foothills of the Himalayas. So the first part of the ride through India was a cultural explosion of experience. The food was fantastic, so much better than I thought it would be. The people were great. The ride was, pretty quick, pretty efficient. It was, and then when we got into Nepal, everything changed. The density of people is, it's much less populated than India. The people were a little bit more respectful and kind. They were all kind to us, but they didn't swarm us like in Nepal, like they had in India. And then, of course, you spend your whole day going uphill, riding uphill and pushing. So your speed goes, whereas 70, 80 miles a day was, or 100 miles a day was good in India, you get to Nepal and you're happy to do 50, or 60 going up these hills.
Man, I bet. I mean, It's just endless, I imagine.
Oh,
absolutely endless. And there's no, and what's the sad thing? There's no payoff. You're in the sense of downhill. That's the one thing you always have with bike touring. It's like, well, I'm going over a pass. So the down, I'll be able to at least ride on the other side. You're headed towards the highest point in the world. So overall, there's no downhill.
Yeah, overall there was no down. There were some downhills because we did go over passes and stuff. But you're right. I mean, it was generally uphill once we got into Nepal, and that it was definitely a different experience riding up through there.
So, what were some of the other challenges getting there? Because this would be an adventure in itself. Just the approach to Everest. You've done Everest before. What were some of those other unexpected challenges?
I think logistics was probably the biggest challenge, is getting a bicycle from here. We have to stage our mountaineering gear in Kathmandu. So we flew to Kathmandu with our bicycles, and then flew from Kathmandu to Kolkata, and then had to find a van that would take us to the coastline. Getting all of those logistics in place. And then when we arrived in Lukla, our mountaineering gear had to meet us there. So we like to say that we did this route unsupported. We went from Bakali, India to Nepal, Lukla, Nepal, without any support at all. But once we got to Lukla, we had a large group of people meet us, Lonnie included, but a number of trekkers who were just supporting the project, who were excited about the Sightless Summit project, joined us. We had a large team, and all of our mountaineering gear showed up with that group. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So in the sense that we didn't carry our mountaineering gear on our bicycles, that showed up in Lukla. But other than that, we were unsupported. And the logistics to manage all that and get our bikes in the right place and our mountaineering gear in the right place and get it shipped and transported, and the bike transported out when we were done with the bicycle portion, that was a lot. That was a lot to plan for and prepare for.
And I mean, gosh, man, you must have been absolutely exhausted too by the time you got there. How were you feeling? Did you feel accomplished? What was like your mental state in the sense of, oh man, we just did that. I can't believe we've gone this far. Now it's time to summit. Where were you there?
So I tend to, I'm sure you know what type 2 fun is, right? It's half the fun is planning, and the other half is looking back, and just a very, very small little bit is the doing, of it. I tend to be very good at planning, and I get excited about the planning component. So once the bicycle ride was ending, I was excited to start the next phase. So we have a large group coming in, including my wife. I haven't seen her in 3 weeks. So I'm happily married for 30. We've been married 32 years. So for me, it was super fun to get back together with her and to be able to spend the next couple of weeks going up to base camp together. And then of course, supporting Lonnie and his journey has been a big part of my life for the last 2 years as we prepared for this whole trip. So once we arrived in Lukla and Lonnie was able to fly in, boy, the whole project of the Sightless Summit project, of getting him to the summit of Mount Everest became kind of the focus. And so with a good night's sleep and, my wife, I would at my side a little bit, I was kind of rejuvenated and excited to do the next kind of step, next phase.
That's so cool. So what was your responsibility with helping getting Lonnie to the summit? Because, your experience with Everest before, obviously knew a lot more of what to expect than if you were there fresh. What was kind of your mindset and some of those challenges that you were kind of preparing for individually?
Yeah, well, I mean, Sightless Summits took a lot of work for the last 2 years to raise the money. Lonnie he's a veteran, he's a disabled veteran, but he wasn't injured in the line of duty in combat. So and of course it stopped his career in the Navy. So the income he gets from the Navy and from the Department of Defense is pretty limited. So we had to raise a lot of money to make it possible for this trip to occur and to offset the expenses of the trip. So that was the previous 2 years. Once we got on the mountain, and I'm sure you've heard this, Everest in Nepal is unique because there's a very high quality, inexpensive labor force within the Sherpa community. So you have porters to carry all your heavy gear. And when you get up high, you have Sherpa guides who carry group gear like tents and ropes and that kind of stuff up. Your job is to focus on your own gear and of course on each other. So we are primarily responsible for Lonnie, but the Sherpas played a huge role in doing a lot of the local guiding. Once we got to the summit bid, it was just the three of us. So it was once we left Camp 4 on our way to the summit and down, it was just me, Lonnie, and Bryan. There were Sherpas around us, but they weren't involved in actually the role of climbing. It was just the three of us. So Lonnie, I don't know how much you got to talk to him the other day. Everest is not necessarily a very technical mountain, especially if you're in the rock climbing community. There's, they'll remind you that it's not a very technical mountain, but it is a difficult mountain. And if you're blind, I think it is very technical. And going through the ice fall and other places required a huge amount of trust by Lonnie of the people who were around him to get over crevasses, to make it through the ice fall and the other places. And that responsibility primarily fell to my partner, Bryan, and I. I think that it's a lot to make sure you're prepared for mentally and physically, but it really helps when you have such a strong, capable person like Lonnie who trusts you to be able to tackle all that together.
What were some of the unique challenges of being blind on Everest? Like how do you find your footholds? What's the communication? Because I'm sure that's an aspect that's really important, is a constant communication with one another.
Yeah, there is a lot of that, and it's hard because you're not breathing very well when you're up at altitude.
I watched your video on top of Lutzi, and you were like, it was like you just ran a marathon. You were trying to talk.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's just constant.
Yeah. So, the biggest challenge I would say for Lonnie was the ice fall. The ice fall is the first major obstacle you reach when you leave base camp. I'm sure you've heard it described, but it is a mishmash of crisscrossing crevasses and ice seracs, big ice towers, and everything that's going down a kind of a frozen waterfall, if you will. It's not frozen in place. It travels 3 or 4 feet a day, so it's constantly moving. But the challenge you have with that are the crevasses. So large crevasses, if they're really large, you have to descend one side, rappel down one side, cross along what you think is the bottom, and then climb out the other side. That's challenging for Lonnie. The next, if it's a mid-sized crevasse, the Sherpa team called the Ice Doctors will put ladders across them. I expected that to be a challenge for Lonnie, to go across those ladders. As it turned out, it was not. He's so good at memorizing his environment. He memorized the distance in the ladder rungs, and he just made his way across those ladders without a whole lot of challenge. Wow. The real challenge, though, is the small crevasses. So we had 100 crevasses that might be 100 feet deep that are only maybe 3 feet wide or 4 feet wide. So for a sighted person like you or I, you step here and you launch yourself over, a sidewalk distance, just like you would over your sidewalk. You just kind of launch over. Well, and land on the other side because you can see where you're landing. Mm-hmm. For Lonnie, he has no idea how far that is. He can reach out with his pole and he gets a sense of over there. But in the end, he just jumps. And there's this belief that you'll catch him. But from his perspective, he's jumping into blackness, into space. And with the hope that he'll be caught on the other end. Somebody will kind of guide him. And so for me, I think his biggest challenge was the icefall section. It was getting over all those small crevasses that aren't level, aren't easy. The footholds are small and easy for a sighted person, but not for a blinded person.
Unbelievable. And because of the moving icefall, kind of the glacier that's constantly moving, all that's all constantly changing. So it's probably very you can't just put a ladder up over every crevasse.
That's correct. I mean,
probably pick and choose the most challenging to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the route you go up is not the same route that you go down 2 or 3 days later because it's been changed. Wow. It's been changed so much. I don't think that actually affects Lonnie that much because he can't see it anyways. He doesn't know what he's traveling or jumping or crossing. He just knows that he has to cross a number of places. But
well, tell us, was there any major mishaps or major potential, other than just the adventure itself? Was there anything that happened that might have put the whole thing in jeopardy?
I think we actually did really well. Probably the biggest challenge I had was on the descent. Lonnie and I were working down the descent part, and there are I don't know if you've heard, Everest this year was a pretty deadly year. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people struggled up there. And I think that's due to a lot of different reasons, but we got down to a section and couldn't proceed any farther because there was an injured climber. So Lonnie got secured into an anchor, and I went down and helped the Sherpa with this guy who was dying, and just mainly to help him get out of the way. And then I had to go back up and help Lonnie down. And in the end, that guy that was being helped, he died. When I came out of my tent at Lhotse, he was, sitting out in front of the tent. But that was an interesting, seeing the death and seeing it firsthand was, I've seen death a few times, but this was a little more personal. So
what were the contributing factors to this season being so deadly? Was there anything unique about this season?
I think that's just a growing situation in Nepal. I think, more people. I think that more people are wanting to do it without training and prep. So, there were people there who still had tags on all their gear, had never used them outside. And you watch them getting dressed and you just shake your head and go without, you don't want to be judgmental, or I don't know anybody else's situation, but when you see people not know how to put on their crampons, or, when it's time to put their harness on, they just raise their hands in the air and their Sherpa runs around them, trying to get them dressed, that kind of stuff. And so, this one guy, for example, that I had helped on this section near the balcony that I just mentioned, he was, at least 70 pounds overweight and unhealthy. He was not a healthy person, and spent the night before going up drinking. And I just think there's maybe a little bit of a casual approach to the mountain, and so I think that's part of the problem. The one thing that I will say that I think is overblown in the media, which is the crowds. I summited Everest in 2021, which then was the highest permit year by Nepal, 408, I think. And then did it again in 23, which was the new highest year, 467 or something. I don't know, 400, high 400. So they increased by quite a bit. But I'll bet we never stood in lines any bottlenecks for more than 30 or 40 minutes total, maybe a couple hours total on the whole mountain. And it usually happens at a place where rappel, so you only have one rope and a whole group has to go down it. But really the crowding thing is more of in my mind, a media driven. I think the recent photos like the one that showed up in that 2019
one.
climb along the summit
200
ridge.
people were in the photo. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the reason that makes such world news is because it doesn't occur that often. It's such a rare event.
Well, isn't that what news is? The exception to the rule.
I think that's right.
Yeah, think about it every day. Well, the reason this is making the news is because it's the exception to the rule.
I'm not saying that they're not issuing too many permits. I can't really speak to that. You keep hearing rumors that Nepal is going to require some background mountains. So one of the things they've talked about is requiring climbers who want to climb Everest climbing a 7,000 meter peak in Nepal. I think that'd be a really good idea.
Oh
personally.
man, I mean, think about it. Like there's qualifying races to enter, Leadville, any ultra marathon, and that's due to lottery and kind of needing to qualify. But like from a safety point of view, it makes a lot of sense too. Why not have a qualifying peak in proof?
Right.
That sounds honestly obvious, and it sounds like a great solution, only because then you not only get people who are experienced, but also people probably that will tend to respect the challenge and respect the mountain a little bit more. That might also have a positive benefit on the garbage and the refuse that's often found on the mountain. I mean, I only hear stories about this. I've never been there myself, but I feel like that's been an issue as well for a while.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is Nepal's revenue. I think they look for the mountain revenue on for the permits for Everest, and I personally think if done right, they could increase their revenue by requiring more mountains in their range to be done. But I think my guess is that they're just a little nervous about.
Got a good thing going.
Yeah.
The good news is the mountain's not going anywhere, and the amount of the people that want to climb it, that is, I think, always going to be there. Just human nature. It is there, and you want to do it. Well, take us through the moment of summiting. I mean, this is a big deal no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in, no matter how many times you've done it. It's a monumental achievement. What was that experience like for you with this kind of added responsibility of bringing somebody up there who can't see?
Yeah. One of the questions so first, my summit in 21 was very different from my summit in 23. We had gorgeous, clear, beautiful weather in 21. We summited right at daybreak. We were the first people up on the mountain. We had 30 minutes by ourselves up there. It was incredible. It was an amazing summit. My summit in 23 was also, we were alone. It was just Lonnie, Bryan, and I with the climbing guide and his Sherpas up there. But it was, I say it was the perfect summit for a blind man. You couldn't see, there was a thick, dense cloud, and you couldn't see more than 10 or 15 feet. It was late in the afternoon. It was like 4 or 5 p.m., which is typically not a good time to be up there. But the weather forecast was pretty good, and we felt confident with what we were doing, and so it was ideal. It was perfect for him. So when you look at our photos of our summit of Everest, it's not as impressive. It's just a dark gray background. You can't see anything, and of course, he couldn't see anything anyway. So that was kind of a perfect thing. But hard. I mean, one of the challenges you have with Everest, while it's not a technical mountain, it is a big mountain, and it is hard to get up there. And so by the time you get there, you're winded, you're tired. You've spent all the energy you think you have. And, there's this almost sense of just get me down. I can't be here. I don't want to take off my oxygen mask to take photos. So you end up with these, silly looking, you could be anybody, just a pair of goggles and a face and an oxygen mask. But Lonnie was, we do what we can to make the experience easier for Lonnie. We're carrying heavy gear and that kind of stuff. He is not carrying heavy gear and things like that. But in the end, he's very good at putting his head down and just getting to work and just pushing and not giving up. And so when we arrived at the South Summit, which is, maybe a couple hundred feet vertically below the actual summit, but it's still, maybe a 45-minute hike. Which 45 minutes at this elevation at where you and I are isn't terrifying it, but up there, boy, it's just, you can't even imagine hiking another 45 minutes without that oxygen, without that. So I was a little worried that he might call there are climbers who call the South Summit their summit. And, we were a little nervous that might happen there, but he's just really good at knowing what the goal is and pushing himself to get that final bit. So, and when we got there, the guide that we had hired, a company called Mountain Professionals, was already there. They were an hour ahead of us or something, but yeah.
Jeez, man. And well, for folks that have never done this and, have heard about Everest their whole life, and they're at least familiar, myself included. I don't think I'll ever climb it. I don't know if I want to, and I'm too cheap too. I like cheap adventures. Just describe, like, what are you experiencing? Like, all this is going through your head. I'm on top of the world. I don't know. Just paint the picture for us. Why it's so impactful.
Okay, so I'll say a couple things. The first is that by the time you get to the summit of Mount Everest, you are spent physically, and that translates to emotions. You hear about people crying on the summit and stuff, and I'm no exception to that. Especially as I get older, I get a little more weepy.
Dude, I cry when I see a pretty scene in the woods. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm like teary when I see a fish swimming through the water. I can't imagine that. Yeah.
So you get beyond the physical thing and into an emotional, it becomes very emotional, very, rewarding. And that's on an individual level. But then, Lonnie is, like I said, he's a blind veteran. His community is primarily blind veterans. And Lonnie he feels like he can have an impact on that community in two ways. The first is by actually spending time with them. And Lonnie's very mentally healthy, but I think there is a lot of mental health issues in that community. I'm not sure how you and I would feel if we lost our eyesight. I know that I probably would struggle with that.
I was blown away talking to him about the mental health, like how intact his mental health seemed while dealing with it, and how, like, his amount of forgiveness and grace with his friend that caused it, like, no hard feelings. I'm like, dude, I don't know. Then having to deal with raising 3 kids as a single father, I'm like, dude, how did you do? Like, you do that, you can do anything. Everest is nothing,
And
so
how
yeah,
do you do
I agree.
Yeah, and how do you do that without being kind of resentful, or
yes,
upset at the world in your situation? And so
that was mind-blowing.
So I would say Lonnie supports his community in two ways. The first is by spending time with them, and he really does travel a lot, and he's oftentimes spending, almost every time we're together, he takes phone calls from a veteran who's struggling with some issue, and he's there and he makes a difference, and he's constantly involved in helping them personally. Wow. But the other way that he has an impact on that community is by showing through his own example that life after a debilitating injury like his isn't over, that you can still have an awesome life. You can still do great things and be of value. And I think climbing Everest is, for him, accomplishing that. He's setting an example. He's showing his blind community that, look, we can do hard things together. And your question was how I feel getting to the summit. The experience on the second time with Lonnie was different, because all of a sudden I'm carrying with me an incredible amount of love for him and an incredible amount of love for his community, the blind veterans, and his success. In some ways, it feels like I get to do something really fun, but still have a meaningful, purposeful effect on other people through him. So the second summit of Everest was about that community and making a difference and feeling like you're helping in some kind of remote, distant way. It wasn't just me out goofing off. We got to show the world that you can do hard things despite, some curveballs being thrown at you.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. One of the questions I asked Lonnie, which you'll have to listen to it, is, who would Lonnie be had he not been shot in the face in 1997? And he's like, I wouldn't be doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And my follow-up is always, especially with people who have that, man, I can't tell you how many people we've had on the show who have had, a really awful, something happened like this. And The phrase, by the time I talked to them on the show, it's been years and they've dealt with it. And we're talking about some amazing achievement they've done, just like Lonnie, and they're glad it happened like that. They're like, I'm glad this happened to me because I would never have done this. I never would have looked at life this way. I've never would have had the impact I've had. I'd just be, I'd be a normal person, which is great. But like my purpose has come from that. And I don't know, for anyone that hasn't experienced a huge tragedy, I just think it provides a lot of hope. Like you said, if something like this is in my future, keep in mind these people like Lonnie. Keep in mind these people who not only are dealing with it really well, but their life is more meaningful because of it otherwise. And it's really, it gives a lot of hope that no matter what happens in the future, you can make a huge difference in this world. It's really cool, man.
I totally agree with you. It gives you but it also gives you perspective about your life now. When you look at Mason's life or Michael's life and you look around at the challenges you're facing, and all of us deal with stuff, but boy, I'm still seeing with my eyes. And so it puts in perspective how lucky and fortunate am I, and to be involved with his experience in doing Everest and some of the other climbs and stuff that we've done together. It is richly rewarding to me. So I feel like I've been blessed by it also.
That is so cool. So what do you think, would you say that's probably the biggest lesson you took away from this, biggest thing you learned? Or when you look at the whole experience, the biking and the climbing, what are some of those other things you think you walked away from learning?
I have one of my kind of gifts in life is that I love people. And I've most of my friends I've made out and about doing my stuff. And Lonnie is just an example of that. And just being with him and going through India and meeting these very different people with very different cultural backgrounds, and then Nepal, is just how much I love those people and how awesome they are. There's so many cool people on the planet who make these adventures so fun, and they all want to be somewhat involved with it. They want to, and some of my best friends now are people that I've met on these kind of adventures. And Lonnie's certainly, right up there. I actually met on the balcony, which is a little flattish spot as you're climbing up Everest. I met a couple. A guy they were on their way down, and his boot had ripped open. The zipper on his boot had ripped open, and I was worried about that. So I got up and went to help him. And it turned out he was deaf, couldn't hear me or understand me. So he and his partner are the first deaf couple to climb Mount Everest. So we became friends. And then in Kathmandu, a week later, I saw him again, and we talked, and we became friends again. And they just spent the week here at my lake in in Oregon, and together. And those friendships are what I live for, being able to. So this experience with Lonnie definitely gave me the opportunity to broaden my groups, broaden my friends, and the people that I have come to love.
That is awesome. And what I'm also blown away by is I can't believe you have 4 grandkids. You just don't look old enough to have grandkids.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. My wife and I got married young. We were, I was 21, I think, and she was 20. And, my
kids young.
Yeah, well, at first you don't know what causes it. All these kids just start showing up, and you're not totally sure what's happening. And, and then you learn, you're like, oh, you can't stop doing that. So what's next, So, and my kids are great because they all got, so far, they all married young, and they have 3 of my kids have their own kids. And one got married just this last year. So I think she'll wait for a little bit, but 4 grandchildren, all boys, 4 grandboys, and the 5th one in a couple weeks.
Not only do you have these great adventures, man, but you have just a wonderful family to go home to. And what do they think about all these things you do? Do they think dad and grandpa's crazy? I mean, the grandkids might not be old enough to understand yet, but the kids, they must think you're a little bit crazy, or are they like this too?
No, they're all of my kids are fit and athletic,
active and whatnot.
Yeah, active. But they didn't grow up with me doing this. Remember, I didn't start doing this until I was in my early 40s, and so do they think we're crazy? Yeah, they do. And in fact, we had a situation this year where when I was in Nepal climbing Everest, my wife decided to hike the desert portion of the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So the only way that they could communicate with either of us is through satellite texting. And, I think they think we're crazy, but it's fun. And my kids are very nice, and they're very nice to us. And we're very fortunate. So
they're nice to you. They're like, mom and dad are going to do their things. We're going
yeah.
to let them do their things and just see them when we see them. That is too cool, man. So
you asked me a question earlier about what one of my favorite things was. Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
As well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So segueing then, you asked me what, at least what I understood to be the question, what is something I'm kind of proud of? I've done a lot of fun stuff. In rock climbing, I've come to realize that it doesn't have to be a hard route to be a fun route. And so I just enjoy taking other people, but on routes that are just awesome, but not necessarily super hard routes. Mm-hmm. But I did, but having said that, I would say that most people are, when we talk about what I've done, are impressed by Everest. And I think Everest is great. I think it's an awesome mountain. I'm glad to have done it those 2 times. But I think climbing El Cap is a harder project, and it's it's one that I'm personally more proud of having done. I've climbed El Cap, I think 5 times now. And it's, for me, more accomplishing, even though it's shorter. It's only 5 or 6 days, when you're the whole project. But it's a neat thing. And to prepare for this trip, one of the things we did is something called the Low to High. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Is it Death Valley to Mount Whitney?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Lowest point in the U.S., contiguous U.S., or the hemisphere, I think.
I think it's the lowest point in the hemisphere. Yeah.
To the highest point in the contiguous U.S. 120 miles apart. Gosh, 15,000 feet of elevation just about, with, not including all the hills. But yeah, tell us about that.
Well, the bicycle portion was 160 miles, 160 miles with about 16,000 feet of elevation to get to this thing called the Whitney Portal, which is kind of the launching off place. And then me and the 2 guys that I did it with, we went up the North Fork of Lone Pine Creek Trail to do the rock climb up the face called the East Buttress climb. It's not a very hard route. It's 5. I think the hardest pitch that we did with the variations we did was 5.8. So it's not necessarily difficult, but it's so much more fun than just hiking to the top of Mount Whitney. So we did that in one push, and me and these 2 guys, and boy, what a hoot that was.
That's a cool experience. I've never done that. I've done the biking portion of it, but I didn't climb Whitney.
Well, now you have a friend, man. Now, I love taking people up stuff like that. So I'm actually headed to Whitney in 2 weeks, and I've got a group of they're not new climbers. Some of them are experienced climbers, but they've never done this route. So there are 4 of us doing, and we're doing the East Buttress route on it.
So that is awesome.
It'll be a hoot. So
that is too cool. So with this sea to summit in Everest, difficulty wise, climbing Everest, biking the 700-800 miles, 900 miles up till then, that's probably easier, but it is a lot longer. How would you compare the 2?
So they're different. The bicycle ride is, you're not at elevation, so you can breathe better, and you can stop and just rest if you need to. We weren't moving super fast. I'd say we moved an average of, I'd have to look at my notes, but somewhere between 80 and 100 miles a day, and mostly flat. The first 500 miles were flat, and then after that, it started getting pretty hilly as we climbed up into the foothills of the Himalayas. But I would say that the bicycling part is maybe a little more fun than climbing Everest. Everest is, I mentioned this, it's not a particularly technical mountain for the sighted. And it's just like a lot of type 2 fun, it's just a bit of a slog. You just keep, mountaineering in general is, you do something for 10 days, and then you wake up on the 11th day and you do the same thing over again on the 11th day. And you kind of have to get into that mindset of, I'm just going to keep going. And so from a fun standpoint, I would say the bicycle route was more fun than than Everest part. But what are you more proud of having done? I'm so proud of Lonnie for having summited, and I'm so proud of playing a very small role in his journey to get to the top. So
that is so cool. 2 more questions and we'll wrap up. What's next for you? Are you with Sightless Summits, y'all have the goal of completing the 7 summits now. Are you going to be a part of that as well?
Yeah, of course. I'm not doing the next exercise they're doing is Antarctica. And I've already done Antarctica, and Antarctica is so expensive to go to. And it's, quite frankly, I wouldn't say it's that awesome. It's just a sheet of ice, with a little bit of rocks up there. So doing it again doesn't really interest me. So Lonnie and Bryan are fundraising right now to raise the money that they need to go do that. After that, he's still got a couple mountains left, and I hope to be a part of that with them. It'll be another 6-8 months. Me personally, going to Whitney in a couple weeks. That'll be fun. I'm running a marathon in a couple weeks. And then really the next little bit, what I'll be doing is my bicycle. I'll fly my bike and me down to Colombia. My bike normally doesn't return to the United States with me. I normally just find a place to keep it wherever I stop. And I'll ride from Barranquilla, Colombia to Quito, Ecuador, about 1,400 miles on this trip.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
And then I'll
great.
store the bike there and come back a few months later and do the next segment.
Last question.
By the way.
And I'm celebrating 9 years of marriage this weekend. What is the key to 30 years plus? What are some tips?
Well, I'll give you 2 thoughts, and these I'm not providing any advice, just my own opinion about my own my own experience. And one lighthearted, one more serious. But the lighthearted one is, make sure you're still physically attracted to each other. And thankfully, I am. I sometimes I wonder why she is, but we still really like each other, and I think that helps. But the more serious answer to that question is something that took me a while to understand, and something that my wife does naturally. And it took me a while to really get, and I had to learn through her example my wife, since we've been married, has honestly cared more about my happiness than she did her own. And so that led to her acting in a certain way about me and supporting me and that kind of stuff. And I think as I got older, I started to appreciate how valuable that is. And so I try my hardest to emulate her in wanting her to be as happy as she can be and have as rich a life as she can. And I think somehow defying the laws of physics, that caring more about someone else somehow reaps better rewards for me, better return on that investment than it should. It's like a what do they call that clock? A perpetual clock.
Perpetual clock. Yeah.
Perpetual motion clock. Yeah. I mean, that physically it shouldn't work. And what I have learned about love and relationships is that the more you care about the other person, the more care you get back to you. And it's like a perpetual. It defies physics. It defies logic, but it works.
Something else that defies, and I think you are someone that will get this. That it seems similar. The more you exercise and stay fit, the more energy you have. Like, how does that make sense? You use energy, right, and for some reason it creates more. That's a phenomenon you often see with people starting to get active. And I think the same principle applies to relationships. That's what comes to mind. Man, that is really cool. Great advice. I like the first one. And I like the second one too. So I'll be sure to tell her that. That is hilarious, man. Well, Michael, thanks so much. This has been awesome. Is there anything else you want to share? I guess for folks to follow along, sightlesssummits.com. You got a great Instagram. I know you say you don't post tons to there, but anywhere else you want to point people?
Yeah, social media for old guys like me is kind of hard. It's like a chore. It's like when I have to post something on social media, I have to stop and go, okay, let's get to your Zen place. Let's think about the photos. Let's think about so I tend to kind of skip it. This summer I've done a lot, but I don't know. So I try to keep my Instagram up every 3 or 4 times a year. I'll try to post something in that. But yeah, just sightlesssummits.com. If I had to direct people, it wouldn't be to me personally necessarily, but to the project. I think sightlesssummits.com is a great place to stay in touch with what Lonnie's doing and some of the other projects that we have coming up.
Sweet. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to the show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.